Hi, this is Thaddaus Dawson. Welcome to the 10,000 Minority Appraisers podcast. Today we have our usually standing guest, William Michael Cunningham, world-renowned economist, broker, appraiser, Miss Shani Aldridge. And our special guest today is Mr. Byron Smith Sr., Esquire. Byron is an attorney and a commercial real estate practitioner, a longtime CCIM instructor. Just most recently celebrated 30 years with the CCIM Institute as an instructor. He also started the Cultural Diversity program with the CCIM Institute in the early 2000s. I believe Byron has been practicing since the late 70s. He's taught a number of students and has been very influential in the space. I've had the pleasure of knowing him for 20 years. He's been a groundbreaking instructor with CCIM. Most recently, he has written some ground lease courses that he'll be coming out here soon. And without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and let Mr. Byron Smith get on the microphone and say hello and tell us some things.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having me on. It's a great opportunity to chat with you and really to uh, focus on what you're doing today, uh, particularly with respect to the 10,000 minority appraisers, which is such a laudable goal. But we'll talk about all of that, but I'm glad to be with all of you.
Yes, welcome. We're happy to have you here.
And Happy New Year. This will be our first recording of the season. Oh, actually, no, I'm just telling a lie. This is our second recording. So
Moving so
Thaddeus,
fast.
I'm a little offended that you didn't get me on first, brother.
well, you
The nerve of you, Thad.
we had you scheduled first. It's just somebody else had an opening, and then we had some availability.
No explanation necessary.
uh, well, Byron is out of Washington, D.C., and he's been extremely influential. A couple of things I like for him to talk about is the CCIM Institute and the way they teach commercial real estate. It really bodes well from a commercial real estate asset analyst and valuation standpoint. They have a practical approach to the commercial real estate space, which gives folks practical applications and how to value, utilize discounted cash flows, everything that's necessary in order to be a valuation expert. They cover in their training, which is very unique. And they teach you how to use spreadsheets, simplistic usage of technology in order to get a favorable outcome in the commercial real estate space. So, Byron, can you speak to that a little bit for me?
Sure. Well, the Institute, which has been around for more than 50 years, I guess it was 1967, so 58 years now that it was established. And it was really a group of smart commercial real estate practitioners who felt that there had to be a way to teach commercial real estate, but bring in all the practicality that exists with the day-to-day practice of commercial real estate. So in other words, yes, we teach take the academic approach, we teach discounted cash flow analysis, we teach all about capitalization rates, internal rate of return, modified internal rate of return, but we teach it from the perspective of that practitioner that's been out in the streets. There's nothing against the academic programs at the universities, but we try to have that added flavor of practicality.
And so, one of the things that I think that you all do better than anybody, especially in the appraisal space, is the Appraisal Institute makes the commercial appraising so mysterious and mystifying, and it overcomplicates the process. Therefore, it's difficult for people to transition from a residential appraisal aspect then to a commercial aspect. I love what you just said about how you work with people who are actually practicing. So I do believe that if you have a residential appraisal background and you want to transfer into a commercial background, that the CCIM is the perfect transition, because then you're able to take your basic real estate appraisal principles and then utilize all of the commercial principles from a practicality standpoint. Then you're able to bridge the gap between the two, as opposed to the Appraisal Institute making it overly complicated for absolutely no reason. But you do see a lot of MAIs now have the CCIM designation. I just believe that it would be easier to go from CCIM to MAI based on the real world analysis and the applications that you all teach.
Well, I think, and as we've discussed previously, our financial analysis course, which is our benchmark course, CI 101, is a course that demystifies, if you will, the financial analysis space. In other words, yes, it is complicated. Yes, when you begin to unravel internal rate of return, when you unravel discounted cash flow analysis, it is complicated, but we try to break it down to its simple components and then build it back up or put it back together, which makes it much more readily understandable, in my opinion, versus some of the more complicated approaches that I've seen. No, I went through business school, graduate business school in the early mid 70s, and it was a challenging approach to teaching financial analysis. Um, I try to make complicated things a little bit simpler. And so I think that's what we do well.
But you also have a 6 or 7 hour pre course that you've now developed to even prior to CC to the 101 class, that transitional in between class that I know you teach, and also Richard Slayton teaches it. And those are the types of things that we want to implement into our apprenticeship program in order to demystify, in order to simplify it, but at the same time, give you a base level foundation. And then once you get the base level, then it's easier to expand upon that base of knowledge, especially when you get repetition.
Yes, and you're correct. We do have a 2-day course, which is what we call the Foundations course, Foundations for Success in Commercial Real Estate. And what that is, it transitions mostly new practitioners or residential practitioners who are trying to move into the commercial space, and somewhat eases them into the space. In other words, we give them much of the basics. We talk about things like capitalization rate, and we talk about internal rate of return, and they build a analysis of a property from soup to nuts. And so in doing that, they feel much more comfortable and confident in coming into the benchmark 101 course, which is financial analysis. So it's a great transitional course for those who are trying to get into the commercial real estate space.
And Shani, I know you had dabbled in commercial real estate a little bit along your journey. Were you able to take any of these courses, and do you think they would have been helpful if not?
I didn't take any of those courses, but I am a huge fan of education and finding ways to sharpen the skill set. But also, like you were saying, Byron, how, to make something that's complicated simpler, that's really important for someone who's pursuing this career, I believe, because they're going to likely be an adult and have a busy schedule and have a lot of things on them. So being able to have the option to transition into the commercial realm of appraising and to have a route that will get you there a little bit quicker and easier, to where you can consume it better, I think is incredible. And anyone who learns about it is going to be like, let me have at it. Let me try that route, you know?
Well, unfortunately for me, I didn't find the CCIM till long after I had taken my Appraisal Institute commercial classes. Then when I did take them, I was like, Well, damn, they could have said that in 2 steps as opposed to this taking me 40 years to get to the promised land. So,
Well, I think if you talk to a lot of our designees who have been through the program, who have taken the financial analysis course, that have taken the investment decision analysis course, which are the two bookends for the core courses, they will tell you, yes, it's a lot of complex material, but by the same token, it is much easier to understand than some of the traditional textbooks that you will find on the subject matter.
oh, I think it's exponentially easier to understand. And then once you are able to establish that base, then you have the ability to expand. And Bill, I just wanted you to comment on market analysis and how it impacts the economy with commercial real estate and the ways that we actually lose and are not participating.
Well, we certainly are not participating anywhere near the level that we should be. But you also have to remember, commercial real estate is in the middle of an inflection point, transition, as all of the financial marketplaces are. Given COVID, given the move away from office spaces and buildings to hybrid type of work, and this call, the fact that we're having this call on Zoom, something that didn't exist 5 years ago, certainly wasn't used in the same way 5 years ago, means that you have to take a look at the whole commercial real estate space in a new way. I think it's my opinion. Now, in terms of African Americans, yes, we have been shut out. We've been shut out of the residential appraisal market, much less the commercial appraisal market, in part because it's so easy to question one's judgment in these types of fields. And when you have a differentiating factor like skin color that you can use to challenge an appraisal when there's a lot of money at stake, white people will use that. They will absolutely use that. That's one of the reasons why we've had such problems here. One of the things that you pointed out, Thaddaus, is that with the reformation of residential real estate appraisals, the economic impact of that is huge. It would be potentially hugely beneficial to the Black community simply by having residential appraisals that are more accurate and more reflective of the true value. And here's the other thing. I mentioned the inflection point. Remember, one of the parts of the inflection point is a new understanding of the value of residential real estate. What COVID showed was the value of simply having a place where you could go to, 24/7. And that's been factored into, it's beginning to be factored into residential real estate values.
I think it's just a beginning as far as starting wealth. That's the base. So once you have that established, what I want Byron to speak about is the land valuation and ground rent. And he is an expert. I remember several years ago, he was ahead of the curve as far as 1031 exchanges. So now, and ground rent has always been something that's been available, but people really don't know about it. And it works in an urban and a rural setting. Like, I guess one of my biggest, or the number one ground rent company in the world would be McDonald's. And everybody thinks McDonald's is a hamburger company.
Right.
McDonald's is a real estate
company.
and their real estate business is based on ground rent. And so I'm going to shut up and let Byron do his thing.
Well, I think you raise a really important point, and the things that we need to know more about. Ground leases, ground rent has been around. You can go back to the 9th century, and particularly the 9th century to the 15th century in feudal Europe. And I just choose feudal Europe simply because of the fact that that's what they teach us. in school. That's what they taught us in school. But whether it's Europe or whether it's Africa or whether it's other parts of the world, land was the basis for wealth. And that land was rented out. And that land could produce wealth. It could produce not only current wealth, but generational wealth. And, let's fast forward today. Ownership of the ground is still the safest real estate investment asset class that there is available. You can talk about retail, you can talk about multifamily, you can talk about office, which of course is in a very difficult position now, particularly after COVID. But of all of those different assets, whether it be single tenant net leases, which you're talking about McDonald's, whether it be office buildings, retail, industrial, owning the ground is the safest investment that one can have.
Well, Byron, all of them start with the ground. So you can't have any of them with the ground. So you make a very poignant point. But the other point I want to talk about in the wealth space, where we lose and have lost, is back to the ground. We started off sharecropping. So we really couldn't own. And then after sharecropping, we would get a percentage, which a lot of those sharecropping situations led to land ownership. Of course, we overpaid for it, rent to own. And that has created a large heirs property situation. That's been a very contributing factor. So I want you to speak a little bit about ground leasing in the rural areas as well, because that gets into crops, crop rotation and everything else. But it's still the safest investment that you can have in the space.
Well, again, and the ground leasing on the from a rural perspective is not something that I focus on so much as urban and suburban situations where there are ground leases. But the point is simply this, that you go back to the sharecropping arrangements. What was occurring? Well, you had a ground owner that was having someone else use their capital, which was essentially labor, and they were producing for that particular ground owner, where the ground owner did not have to utilize their own capital, did not have to take the risk of planting that crop, but yet and still got a piece of whatever was produced from that land. And again, this is what I think is so important for not only us, but for everyone to understand, because the ground lease course that I have really explains the basics, the fundamentals of ground leases. And then we are now at the point of producing a sequel to that, which is Advanced Ground Lease Topics, which deals with problems that
and we plan on hosting those courses on our learning management system platform at 10K. Look for those to be coming here real soon. And I've been blessed to be able to be a contributing proofreader. Not that I'm contributing, I'm just looking for, editorial, and so I'm really excited.
Well, you're gonna proof the sequel, okay? I'm gonna have you proof the sequel, which is about to get off the presses within the next week or so. But what I think what's important to understand is not only that ground leases are the basis for all of real estate, or the ground is the basis for all of the different types and classes of real estate, but we also need to understand the importance of generating generational wealth through the ownership of the ground. Because, if you have that ground and that ground has been leased on a long-term basis, Thaddaus or Shani or Bill can prepare for not only the next generation, but the generation after that, to have not only a stream of relatively management-free income, but also to have at a later date the reversion of the improvements that exist upon that ground when they come back at the end of the ground lease term.
And then at the reversion, that the value may also change, because there may be alternative highest and best use. I've been watching Yellowstone, And so now they switched off to 1923, where they first started owning the land and they were leasing it for cattle. Well, eventually the cows were eating up all the grass, and then there was more money in the minerals. So to Byron's point, at the reversion, instead of cattle, you might be doing minerals. Or if the minerals values exceed that, you may be able to step in and up the value by buying out the lease. But a lot of times in the valuation of these things are the income stream. But long term, Byron, well, it sounds like might be a good 40-year ground lease today. How do I prevent that from being a bad investment 10 years from now and locking in?
Well, again, this is one of the most important aspects of the ground lease process, the ground lease agreement. And that's, what are the reset provisions? What are the requirements for indexation? It used to be, and most of us will simply look to New York City as the icon for ground leases, simply because ground was always so valuable there that many times it was not sold. So we have scenarios in which the rent resets can adversely impact the uh, the ground tenant because they become very, very large within 10 or 15 or 20 years from the inception of the lease. But there are also situations, if the ground lease is not properly indexed, inflation can erode away the value of that ground lease position during the term of the lease. So by way of example, I had someone contact me about their family. They had leased land in Maryland almost 50 years ago, 47 years ago, back in 1977. They didn't have proper indexation, in other words, inflation protection, and they ended up having to effectively have rents that were at 1980, 1990 ranges in the 21st century. And that just eroded away their position. But fortunately, the ground lease is coming to an end. They will get the ground back, and they've learned a very, very difficult lesson.
And it's a very expensive lesson, one that the federal government and the Native Americans are paying for at this very moment as we speak, because they have outdated leases. But these leases are for rights of way. These are for fiber optic, power, oil and gas, and water lines, as well as railways. So that what you said as far as indexing is really, really important. And right now, even on the residential side, whole subdivisions are being built and then rented out. So it's basically the sharecropping model where you renting to own and you never have the full bundle of rights. And the full bundle of rights still reside with the landowner. And then they still get the reversion at the end, or they get to charge you the reversion amount at the end.
Well, and again, this is the importance of having not only good real estate counsel, but good ground lease real estate counsel if you are going to enter into any kind of ground lease. And that's on either the seller side, or rather the ground owner side, or the ground tenant side. If you aren't aware of all of the pitfalls that exist, whether the pitfalls be the reset provision and indexation, whether the pitfalls be what happens when there's a bankruptcy of the ground owner or the ground tenant, environmental issues, all of those can be traps that sandbag the one or both of the parties that are involved.
What I would like for you and Bill to engage is the indexation. I want you to say what indexes you would use in indexation. And then, Bill, I would like for you to speak to the reliability of that indexation. I know for the longest, folks were using T-bills or notes, or the CPI. And how accurate is that? And what would be the best indices to use for indexing?
Well, today, what we're seeing a lot of is a CPI index. In other words, tying the future increases in rent to the consumer price index with certain caps involved. That's one approach. There could be specified step increases every second or fourth or fifth year. There could be a reset provision that says 10 years or 15 years down the pike, there will be a revaluation of the ground based upon certain factors. Again, are they any of them bulletproof? Absolutely not. But there's a problem with the CPI because what is CPI measuring? I mean, if you take what CPI measured 40 years ago versus what it's measuring today, the level of accuracy is not as spot on as it should or could be.
Bill, can you speak to the differences in the CPI, what it measured then as opposed to what it measures now?
Well, one of the key differentials is services. Remember, think about 40 years ago when 50 years ago, when CPI was created, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have streaming services. We didn't have Zoom. So how do you account for a change in the valuation of a service like a Zoom in people's consumption baskets? The other thing is CPI, remember, is an index that measures your consumption basket. So you take a look at things that people are buying and you look at the changes in prices of those items over time. It's like a good way to think about it is the Big Mac index. There's an index of the price change of a Big Mac over the course of the past 40 years. So it went from, I think, $2 to $10 now, so that's a real world indicator of the change.
Use McDonald's as a price index?
Yeah, because it's something that everybody understands. You can see it also. And this gets to your question about where those indices should go. The reason why the Big Mac index is so popular is because there's a McDonald's on every street corner. So you can look through the window and see what the change is in the price of a Big Mac, or you used to be able. Now they have those kiosks.
So this is where the problem comes in. With fat people like myself, you can't use all these food indexes. So now if I'm looking for a natural disaster, I can rank the disaster on whether or not Waffle House is open or closed.
Well, now, and that gets to the other point. Remember what I said. The inflection point impacts real estate valuations in the following way. Residential values go up because there's more value to having a place where you can rest your head 24/7. Commercial valuations go down because there's been a reconfiguration of actual human values. And people understand that, hey, and what Zoom and the pandemic showed was that I can carry out all of these work tasks and I didn't have to go into the office in order to carry out those work tasks. So that's a complete revaluation. In terms of where the indices are going, and Mr. Smith hinted at this. I mean, what you really want is you want a real-time micro level index that measures price changes and valuation changes that are specific to the geographic area, maybe the block or the census tract in which that property is located. So rather than using the national CPI index, which measures the change in the consumption basket nationwide, what you want a consumption basket, an inflation price index that measures changes in prices in your neighborhood, on the block where that building is located or wherever that commercial property is. And that's where we're going. Remember, this is part of the value of Facebook, of Twitter, of LinkedIn, is the ability to create very specific indices, very tailored, very micro-tailored
I like what
indices.
You said about the Big Mac index. Byron, how effective is the Big Mac index, and is that something that CCIM uses to simplify the process?
Yep.
So I think Byron's screen is frozen, and I let him back in.
Okay.
Shani, you want to jump in there?
Oh yeah, I wanted to touch on Are you there, Mr. Byron?
You go ahead, Shawnee.
Okay. Yes, so I want to touch on the education piece because for a large part of his career, Byron, you've been educating students. And so I wanted to ask you about your students, the audience, and the demographics from when you first started teaching up until now. I mean, the stats, they are what they are. We have, a large amount of participants in this appraisal world that are white men, older gentlemen. So now when you're teaching these courses to your students, are you seeing a different demographic of students in your classroom?
Uh, can you hear me, Shani? I
We
lost.
can hear you. We just
Oh,
can't see you.
Okay, I
Hey,
oh,
lost the
see you too.
we can
lost
see you now.
connectivity for a minute. So if I just want to make sure I've got the question that you were answering, and how has the demographics changed? And I would say to you that when I started with the CCIM Institute and when I took courses in the 90s, there were, I mean, literally no people of color in classes that I took then. In 94, when we began the process of of teaching, or I began the process of teaching, very few.
Okay.
And that today, that has changed dramatically, particularly in markets like Washington, Atlanta, LA, Frisco, most of our urban markets. We have a large number of folks who are from underrepresented communities. We have, through our cultural diversity program, brought in about 1,700 folks over the last 20 plus years into the program. Many of them have matriculated, many of them have become CCIM designees, and they've gone on to companies like Marcus and Millichap, Walmart, uh, CBRE, Cushman and Wakefield, financial
Wow.
institutions. So it's been a dramatic change over the.
Why do you think that happened? Like, what do you think was the catalyst for there being more representation?
Well, I think it's clearly, one of the things that I did in the late 90s was go to the Institute and say, what is the subliminal message that is being sent by the advertising that we do? What was it? It was essentially two white males shaking hands, discussing transactions. And so the Institute was very proactive in changing its advertising
Okay.
to be more inclusive, and
Mhm.
also had made a commitment to open the doors for more people to come into the commercial side of the industry
I
and be
believe it
very.
was their intentionality and also the
Yeah.
welcoming environment when you actually got to the classroom. Now, being the only person of color in majority of the classes early in my career, it's always been that way, but it's never been uncomfortable for me because I've been able to navigate the space and know what I wanted to do. But the welcoming that was received from the CCIM Institute by far was unparalleled. And you would say, I said earlier in my career, well, just recently I was in Kansas City at the American Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers, and there was 300 people in me. And so that was like Back to the Future experience. But again, I know what I'm trying to do. I know who I am in the space. I love the intentionality that Byron spoke about that they went into, and it's so important to have people that look like you in the space. This is where I believe the appraisal industry totally misses the boat. They want to not claim any responsibility, first of all, for bias, which I can give them a pass because the model is outdated and antiquated and needs to be updated. Where I do hold them accountability is the intentionality, inclusivity in the space, making people feel comfortable. So that's been an issue, and keeping people out intentionally, and not that it needs to be easy, but there's been very, very limited access. And even today, the programming is disingenuous at best, in my humble opinion. But then that's just me. We'll show you a recent picture of a group of what their version of diversity looks like. And it's almost laughable, but again, not trying to throw darts at anybody, just trying to bring representation and some levity to the playing field, which Byron, I think you have really been very instrumental. I know I reached out to you when you got your CCIM was celebrating you for your 30 years, and you commented on how proud you were of your students to see the level of impact that you had, and you had no idea.
Well, I've been fortunate to have some really wonderful students that have come along over the years. Many of them have achieved levels of success and varying levels of success. Some, I have one gentleman, I don't want to mention names, but who started as an early participant in the CDEP program, did not really know much about commercial real estate at the time. He later became the multifamily manager for, when I say manager, the lead, the broker that was in charge for the multifamily division for Cushman and Wakefield in one of our major Texas cities. He's now gone on to create um, a international firm that tokenizes real estate and has done billions of dollars, not millions, billions of dollars worth of tokenized real estate transactions. He's the CEO of that. Had
Did you get a
another.
residual for putting that all together for him?
I wish I did. I wouldn't be here. I'd be in Tahiti, brother. Having a good time on the beach. No, I don't get a residual, but there's a residual satisfaction in knowing that folks' lives have been touched over the years, and that they've gone on to have impact in their communities. And I think that's the important point, because what we are doing, what you were doing, what I have done, has been to train people so that they can control their own destiny by virtue of the fact that if you are knowledgeable, if you know what you're doing, you not only can make money for yourself, if that's your objective, but you can have control within your community. What is going to be developed, how it's going to be developed, who's going to develop it. Those are the things that are extremely important. And if we can continue to train folks and make them the best, and know exactly what they need to know, while it won't take care of every issue, it sure is going to take care of a whole lot of issues.
Where do you find the most advantageous ground leasing opportunities to be in retail, office, commercial, or industrial? We lost you again, Byron.
Whoops.
No.
Yep,
Sean,
looks
can you hear me?
you're on mute, Byron. Testing, testing, still on mute.
So, Byron, go out and come back in. Bill, can you speak some more about the indexing and the impact overall that you see for property types?
Well, in keeping with what you're trying to do in terms of bringing more minorities, and when I say minorities, I mean African Americans into the appraisal business and the impact that that has on property values and generational wealth. Which once again, one of the things that I would encourage you to do, Thaddaus, is put up a page on your website that runs the numbers that shows the difference that fair appraisals can make to the economic profile of the Black community. It's billions and billions of dollars, well, I see Byron should be back. Testing, testing.
Keep going, Bill. He'll come in a second.
All right, there you go. So the idea is that because of the large economic impact and differential that this effort can have, we know that there'll be a lot of parties that are not necessarily in favor of us capturing that economic value. Because think about it. If we're not capturing that economic value, who is? It's in other people's hands, other families' hands right now. So they're not going to be happy about us transferring that value to our community, but it's something that we must do. And again, remember what I said, commercial real estate values going down, residential values going up. Still important. Both are important. But that's, again, what we see 5 to 10 years down the road. It's
And
not
to
like
that
that's
point,
happening right now.
Byron, one of the things that I've been looking at is the high vacancy rate for office buildings and the conversion of office buildings into housing. It seems as though to retrofit the office building into housing is going to be extremely expensive, and you're going to have to take a super deep discount. And is the market fallen that much, or will fall that much, to make that a viable alternative use?
Well, it's a real challenge today because you have not only the costs associated with converting office properties into residential units, simply because of many instances, the configurations of the floor plates of the buildings, but you also have a challenge with respect to the overall costs. And in addition to the cost, if you cannot acquire that asset for pennies on the dollar, it's going to be a real challenge to make the conversion. And additionally, in some cities like New York, where they have these massive floor plates and not enough window line, you can't have apartments that don't have windows. So, you could have a floor plate of 40,000 square feet, but if there's not enough window line to break that into multiple units that each and every one of them has adequate light and air, there's your problem again. So it is a challenge.
Hostels or assisted living or some sort of communal space is where folks don't necessarily have to be alone. I know one thing that I did see recently in Cincinnati in a high-rise metropolitan housing building where it wasn't ADA compliant. So what they did was utilize the housing for transitional housing for people coming from prison, and they also were able to use that housing for young men. And there has, with that, been a real sense of pride in them having a space to live, and they protect it very well. So, are there opportunities like that to rethink space and how much is going to be discounted with this supposed softness of the office market?
Well, I think if you look at, right in DC, and Bill, I'm sure you're probably familiar with the building adjacent to the Capitol Center down in Chinatown. We had a building down there, not my company, but there was a transaction there earlier, or last year, maybe spring of last year's early summer, where that building, I think it was 661,000 square feet. About 80% of the office was vacant. About 46% of the retail was vacant. There were some condo units in there that were owned by the developer. That traded for like 37% of its pre-COVID value. So what you're seeing is, for buildings that are older, Class B, those buildings are trading for very, very difficult prices going out. In other words, it could be 20%, 25%, 30%, 40% of their pre-COVID values. For those of you who are real estate, and this is not a plug for the magazine, but it's just a great resource, and that's The Real Deal. And The Real Deal is a great resource for commercial real estate transactions and activity. But you're seeing this across the country. You had the AT&T building out in St. Louis that traded for, if I recall correctly, it was about $2.75 a square foot. This was a 900,000 square foot building, totally empty, in a not so attractive portion of downtown St. Louis. You're seeing real difficult challenges like that across the country. So how much longer this will last, I don't know. You've got $1 trillion worth of commercial real estate that rolls over in 2025. And just the other day, TREP, I'm sure you're familiar with them, Thaddaus, but TREP just came out with their fourth quarter vacancy, and office is at the highest point that it's been in recent history. So
now I've got to let me ask you something, Mr. Smith. Is this a buying opportunity for African Americans, do you think, on the commercial real estate? Should we be pooling our money and buying these undervalued commercial buildings?
Well, I've always been a proponent of buying at a steep discount. However, I think this is, I mean, every deal has to stand upon its own. Certainly there's opportunity, but again, it has to be guided by knowledgeable practitioners who can take the group through that kind of acquisition. The short answer is yes, but provided you have adequate guidance, because there's certain properties that basically are nothing more than land value. They just are going to have to be demolished and put some other use there. Again, guidance is the key.
Well, that's interesting. I do know of one Black Trade Association that is looking to make a purchase, a major purchase of a commercial asset in Washington, D.C., and then offer out. We're looking at commercial real estate crowdfunding and sharing some of the value. So we should probably chat about that. I think it's depending upon valuations, as you said, depending upon guidance. If you can get something for 1 penny on a dollar, well, then, yeah, sure, you should buy it. But on the other hand, if it's 99 cents on the dollar, that's one of the keys.
I think there are going to be more buying opportunities as we move through 2025, because not only is office challenged, and some of the other asset classes are being challenged as well, just not so much as the cases with office, but the problem is that this money has to be rolled over and it has to be refied. And many times the valuations which were here in 5 years, 7 years ago when the mortgage was put on, they're now down to here. The owners of those properties do not have the additional capital to backfill the equity position so that they can meet the guidelines of the lender that potentially could refinance the transaction. And not only that, the interest rates, which were 3.5%, 4.5% 5 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, are now 7.5%. It just makes for a very, very challenging scenario.
So, Bill, who ends up eating those costs now? Do they go back to the owners, or do the owners walk away and they go to the banks? Now are the banks going back to the government for the big bailout again?
Well, remember that saying that if your bank is into you for $100 million, it's the bank's problem. If they're into you for $1 million, it's your problem. So it depends upon or if it's let's say it's $1 billion property that some bank has a loan out on, and you've got to come up to this. You've seen a decrease in equity, and you're hitting a wall with respect to the refinancing. Yeah, that's the bank's problem. The bank is really good. It's everybody's problem, to tell you the absolute truth. But it is mainly the bank. Mr. Smith, what do you think?
Well, I would simply add one more point to that, and that is look at the capital positions of so many of the banks in the marketplace today. Many of the banks bought treasury bonds when we had very low interest rates, when you had 1% Fed funds rates, and they bought 10-year notes and 30-year bonds. Those bonds, the valuation, which was their capital asset, have declined in value, which means their capital has declined in value. And if you have to mark to market those assets, the banks are in trouble and they can't afford to take another hit from commercial real estate. So there's a challenge there all the way around. Now, is everyone being candid and showing their cards today? Absolutely not. There are problems there, and everybody's just kind of whistling past the graveyard. A lot of the banks.
So Byron, is it a market shift, or were they overvalued to begin with, or nobody foreseeing COVID coming and having the devastating, long-lasting impact that it's had? And with the new administration coming in, forcing people to go back to work, how big of an impact will that have on the office market?
Well, I think all of the things that you mentioned are relevant. Were the valuations good back in 2017, 2015, whenever those mortgages were put on? You know, if you put a 7-year mortgage on a piece of property in 2018, those valuations probably were within a range. But remember, we had zero interest rate policy at that time. So if you had zero interest rate policy, you had a distorted marketplace. We didn't have interest rates that were discovered in the marketplace. They were set artificially by the Fed, which did what? It distorted the implementation and use of capital. It distorted valuations. So what I was saying to you, yes, they were reasonably valued based upon the facts that we had to deal with back then. Now, did anyone foresee COVID? No. I mean,
No, I did. No, I most certainly did.
Okay,
December 26, 2016, we issued a forecast that said that this was going to be bad. We didn't know it was going to be COVID, but we knew it was going to be bad.
You knew it was going to be COVID? You tell me? Okay, well, no. We knew something was coming.
We knew something, and we knew it was going to be bad, you know. So, and that's not rocket science either.
Well, and I would just say to you that there are a lot of factors there, but I think we have to fast forward to the soup that we're in today, and that is we've got these higher interest rates. You know, I hear a lot of young people. I have a son that's 44 years old. And he said, well, Dad, you know, a lot of younger people today think that it's a challenging time. Things were different when you came along. I said, yeah, they were different. Interest rates were 18% back in 1981 and 82. They were a whole lot different. But my point is simply this: interest rates have risen. Things have become much more expensive relative to where they were. It's a big challenge today. So what are you going to do? You've got to deal with this hand that we've been dealt right now, and that it's a difficult hand all the way around. But again, those who have capital or access to capital, those who can pool equity capital, are going to make the best of this situation, the opportunities that will be presented.
Listen, I want to thank you. I've got to hop, as I mentioned earlier, but certainly, Mr. Smith, I appreciate you. Thaddaus, you know I appreciate you, and Shawnee, you know I appreciate you as well.
Well, we were getting ready to wrap up anyway because we knew you had to hop, and we want to be respectful of everybody's time. And Byron, we can't end it without you promising to come back. So,
well, let's do another one of these where we can have a chance to chat and talk about the opportunities. But again, I would really want to talk about building generational wealth for people within our communities. That is where we have to work the hardest, because the opportunity can be there. We just have to know how to develop it.
Great.
Well, Thank you
I
all
will-
for your time. Bill, have a good one. Byron,
Bill.
thank you. Definitely will be circling back to do this again.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Pleasure talking with everybody. Have a good evening.
Yes, take care.